Maggie Brooks had spent 30 years inside the walls of the Tribune. She had started as a young, ambitious intern, fresh out of journalism school, with nothing but a notepad and a fire in her heart. Over time, she became one of the most respected senior editors, known for her sharp instincts, elegant storytelling, and an unwavering dedication to truth. But today, she was being erased. Maggie sat across from Lucas Greer, the newly appointed CEO, a man who valued efficiency over excellence, numbers over nuance. His expression was void of sympathy as he slid a white envelope across the polished mahogany desk. "This isn't personal, Margaret. It's just, the future." She didn't reach for the envelope. Instead, she met his gaze, steady and unblinking. "The future?" Her voice was calm, but there was a steel edge beneath it. "The future of journalism is a machine?" Greer leaned back, exhaling as if explaining something painfully obvious. "AI has revolutionized content production. We can generate hundreds of articles in minutes, optimized for engagement, tailored for every reader. It's faster, cheaper, and let's be honest, it doesn't get writer's block." Maggie's chest tightened. She had known changes were coming, had watched younger employees whispering excitedly about the latest AI tools that could generate breaking news in seconds. But she had never imagined that her entire career, her entire life's work, would be discarded like an outdated operating system. "Lucas," she said, voice low but firm. "An algorithm can't ask the right questions. It doesn't challenge power. It doesn't see the human truth behind the numbers." Greer shrugged, indifferent. "The truth is subjective. What matters is what sells." She clenched her fists under the table. "And what about integrity?" He laughed. Actually laughed. "Integrity doesn't pay the bills, Maggie." She stared at him, at the cold, calculated efficiency in his eyes. She had spent 3 decades building this paper into something respected. And now, she was obsolete. Maggie pushed back her chair, stood, and picked up the white envelope, her severance package. As she walked out of his office, she paused at the door. "One day, you'll realize," she said quietly. "When there's no soul left in what you publish. When no one believes a word you print. When your AI writes you out of the story, too." She left without looking back. What she didn't know was that her story was just beginning. For the first time in 30 years, Maggie Brooks woke up without a deadline. No emails from reporters needing edits. No last-minute fact-checking before going to print. Just the quiet hum of her old coffee maker and the deafening realization that she had nowhere to be. She had always assumed she'd retire on her own terms, maybe mentor young journalists, leave behind a legacy that mattered. Instead, she had been erased overnight, replaced by an algorithm that didn't know the difference between truth and engagement metrics. At first, she tried to move on. She spent her mornings walking through the city, her afternoons reading long-form journalism, the kind AI couldn't replicate. But something gnawed at her, an emptiness, a restlessness. And then, it happened. 3 months after her departure, the Tribune published a breaking story about a senator's financial scandal. It had all the right components: political corruption, hidden offshore accounts, and impending indictment. But there was one problem. The scandal wasn't real. The AI had fabricated sources, manipulated old data, and stitched together a story so convincingly that no one caught the errors, until it was too late. By the time the Tribune issued a retraction, the damage was done. Lawsuits piled up. Advertisers pulled out. The once prestigious newspaper was now a global embarrassment. Maggie watched the chaos unfold from her apartment, sipping her coffee as headlines blared. AI fails, major publication caught publishing false reports. She couldn't help but feel a grim sense of satisfaction. They had chosen efficiency over expertise. Speed over accuracy. A machine over a journalist. And now, they were paying the price. But this wasn't just about the Tribune. AI was taking over newsrooms across the country, writing articles, predicting trends, replacing human judgment with code and keywords. The same thing would happen again. Unless Maggie put down her coffee. Unless someone fought back. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as an idea took shape. She wasn't going to beg for her old job back. She wasn't going to sit on the sidelines and watch journalism die. She was going to build something new. And this time, they wouldn't see it coming. Maggie had spent 3 decades mastering the art of storytelling, how to craft a headline that hooked, how to structure a narrative that made readers feel. But now, the rules had changed. It wasn't just about the truth anymore. It was about who controlled the platforms that delivered it. AI wasn't just writing the news, it was deciding what was newsworthy, feeding audiences what they wanted to hear, not what they needed to know. And that's where Maggie saw her opening. She didn't need to fight the machine. She needed to beat it at its own game. She spent weeks researching AI-generated journalism, dissecting its weaknesses. It was fast, yes, but predictable. It relied on patterns, trends, recycled narratives. It couldn't dig deep, couldn't ask tough questions, couldn't challenge power the way a real journalist could. So she started experimenting. A new kind of news outlet. Human-driven. AI-assisted. She launched a small independent platform, handpicking a team of veteran journalists who had also been discarded by the industry. Reporters, editors, fact-checkers, people who still believed in real journalism. But instead of ignoring AI, Maggie did something different. She used it to her advantage. She trained AI to analyze misinformation, to detect the subtle manipulations in machine-written articles. She used it to track public sentiment, identifying which stories people needed but weren't being given. She automated the grunt work, transcriptions, keyword optimization, data sorting, so her journalists could focus on what AI couldn't do. Investigate. Question. Expose. And then she did something the Tribune had never dared to do. She put transparency at the center. Every article on her platform came with a behind-the-scenes breakdown, how it was fact-checked, which sources were used, and which parts of the reporting had AI assistance. No hidden algorithms. No silent rewrites. Just truth. It was radical. It was exactly what people had been waiting for. Within months, her platform exploded. Readers craved trustworthy news, and Maggie's team delivered. Subscription numbers skyrocketed, and major investors took notice. One morning, she checked her inbox and saw a subject line that made her heart skip a beat. A proposal from the Tribune. She clicked. And there it was. They wanted her back. Not just as an editor. As their editor-in-chief. Maggie leaned back, staring at the screen. The same company that had tossed her aside for AI was now begging for her expertise. And she wasn't done making them sweat. Maggie stared at the email for a long time. They needed her. The Tribune, the same company that had thrown her out like yesterday's news, was now struggling. Their AI-generated content had backfired spectacularly. Readers stopped trusting them. Journalists refused to work for them. Advertisers pulled out. The once powerful Tribune was now a hollow shell, its reputation in tatters. And now, they wanted her to fix it. Maggie could already picture the desperate meeting that led to this email. Suits in a boardroom, shifting uncomfortably in their leather chairs, realizing too late that news couldn't be manufactured by machines. She almost laughed. They had built a monster they couldn't control. And she had built something better. She didn't reply right away. Instead, she forwarded the email to her team with a simple subject line. Thoughts? Responses flooded in within minutes. They must be joking. They destroyed real journalism, and now they want you to clean up their mess? Take the meeting. Let them squirm. Maggie wasn't interested in revenge. But she was interested in power. For years, the Tribune had dictated the rules of journalism. They decided who got a voice and who got silenced. They wielded influence like a weapon, crushing anyone who didn't fit their corporate agenda. Maggie had spent her entire career playing by their rules. Now, they were playing by hers. She responded to the email with one sentence. Let's talk. A week later, she walked through the glass doors of the Tribune headquarters for the first time since the day they had fired her. The receptionist recognized her instantly. "Miss Callahan?" Her voice wavered, as if she wasn't sure if she was seeing a ghost or a reckoning. Maggie just smiled. "I have a meeting with your CEO." She was escorted to the executive conference room, a space she had once been too intimidated to enter. Now, she owned the room before she even sat down. Across the table, the same executives who had called her obsolete now looked at her with thinly veiled desperation. They needed her more than she needed them. "Ms. Callahan," the CEO started, forcing a tight smile. "Thank you for coming." Maggie leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. "Let's cut the small talk. You wouldn't have reached out unless you were in trouble." A few nervous glances shot across the table. The CEO cleared his throat. "Look, we underestimated the role of human journalism. AI, it's efficient, but, well, the public perception isn't where we'd hoped. We need someone who understands what readers want. Someone with credibility." He paused. "You." Maggie let the silence stretch. "Let them sweat." "You didn't just underestimate human journalism," she finally said. "You killed it. You fired real journalists, sold out your integrity for efficiency, and now you want me to patch up the mess." The CFO leaned forward. "Ms. Callahan, let's be reasonable. We're offering you full editorial control. Your own team. A leadership role. We believe you can restore the Tribune's legacy." Maggie tilted her head. "And what makes you think I'd want to do that?" The room went silent. They had expected her to jump at the opportunity. To be grateful. To want to reclaim her old title. But Maggie Callahan was no longer the woman they had fired. She was something bigger now. Her independent platform was thriving. She had built a new era of journalism, one that didn't answer to corporate overlords. And if she was going to take this deal, it would be on her terms. Maggie leaned forward, tapping her fingers against the table. "I don't want my old job." Confusion rippled through the room. "I want a merger." Maggie watched as their faces paled. "I want my newsroom, my team, and my ethics to take over. You don't hire me, you absorb my platform. We become the new Tribune." The CEO's jaw tightened. "Maggie, that's a bold proposition." She smiled. "Good journalism always is." The silence in the conference room was thick. Maggie watched as the executives exchanged uneasy glances. They were powerful men, the kind who were used to giving ultimatums, not receiving them. Now, for the first time, they weren't in control. The CEO forced a smile, though his knuckles tightened around the edge of the table. "Maggie, let's be realistic. A merger? That's a drastic move." Maggie crossed her arms. "So was replacing an entire newsroom with AI." A few of them shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "The Tribune isn't in a position to merge with a startup," the CFO interjected, his voice sharper. "Your platform is impressive, but you lack the infrastructure." Maggie held up a hand, cutting him off. "Let me clarify something." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "I don't need the Tribune." The words hit like a slap. "I built something that works without corporate interference. My readers trust me. Your readers don't trust you. That's the difference." She tapped her fingers against the table. "And let's not pretend this is about infrastructure. If it were, you wouldn't be in this room, trying to salvage what's left of your credibility." The CEO exhaled through his nose. "We're open to negotiation, Maggie. But we need something mutually beneficial." Maggie tilted her head. "You want mutual? Then here's my deal." She placed her phone on the table and pulled up the latest subscriber count from Callahan Reports, her independent news platform. The numbers didn't lie. Her readership was growing. The Tribune's was shrinking. She turned the phone around, letting them see. "I bring in my editorial team, my investigative journalists, and my community trust. We rewrite the way the Tribune operates: real news, real accountability, no AI-generated garbage. A muscle twitched in the CEO's jaw. And in return? Maggie leaned back, a small smile playing at her lips. I get majority control. The reaction was immediate. Half the room bristled, the other half paled. Maggie, that's... It's called leverage, she interrupted smoothly. And I have all of it. The CFO let out a forced chuckle, as if trying to lighten the tension. You drive a hard bargain. Maggie didn't blink. I learned from the best. She let the weight of her words settle. For years, she had sat in boardrooms just like this one, watching men in expensive suits dismantle everything she had built, piece by piece. Now, she was rebuilding on her terms. The CEO exhaled slowly, then looked at his team. Let's step outside for a moment. Maggie watched as they shuffled out of the room, whispering in hushed tones. She knew what was happening. They were panicking. The Tribune couldn't afford to keep losing credibility, but the idea of surrendering power to a woman they had once discarded was almost unbearable. And yet, they had no choice. Minutes later, the executives returned, their faces unreadable. The CEO adjusted his tie, then sat back down. Maggie, he said carefully. If we agree to your terms, you're not just coming back as an editor. Maggie raised an eyebrow. You'd be the first female editor-in-chief in Tribune history, he continued. Publicly, this would signal a major shift for our company. But internally, you'd have to navigate. Maggie cut him off. I know exactly what I'd be navigating. She had spent decades fighting for a seat at the table. Now? She was taking the whole damn table. The CEO studied her for a long moment. Then, finally, he extended a hand. Welcome back to the Tribune, Ms. Callahan. Maggie didn't hesitate. She shook his hand, but this time, she was the one calling the shots. Maggie didn't return to the Tribune as a triumphant hero. She returned as a woman with unfinished business. The newsroom was a ghost town, but instead of fixing the problem, CEO Lucas Greer doubled down. We don't need journalists, we need engagement. That was his philosophy: clickbait, AI-written fluff, and paid sponsorships disguised as news. It was a race to the bottom. And it was working, until it wasn't. A scandal broke when the Tribune's AI published a false report claiming a new healthcare policy would cut Medicare benefits for seniors. The backlash was immediate. Lawsuits piled up. Advertisers pulled out. Maggie had warned them. Now, she was sitting across from Greer in a high-rise conference room, listening to him try to save himself. You were right, he admitted, forcing a tight-lipped smile. People still want real journalism. She leaned back, arms crossed. Real journalism requires real journalists. He exhaled sharply. We want you back. Full editorial control. For a moment, Maggie considered it. Then she slid a file across the table. I already own half your readership. Callahan Reports had overtaken the Tribune. Her network of laid-off reporters, investigative freelancers, and disillusioned editors had built something stronger. Something trustworthy. People were sick of being lied to. Subscribers surged. The Tribune was dying. Greer knew it. So did Maggie. She didn't need to save the Tribune. She needed to bury it. But this wasn't just about revenge. Maggie had spent 30 years shaping the news, but what kind of world would she leave behind? AI wasn't going away. The fight wasn't about stopping it. It was about controlling it. And there was one person who could help her do that. Her daughter, Emily. They had barely spoken since Maggie's layoff. Emily, a lead engineer at a top AI firm, had sided with technology over traditional media. Now, she was the only person Maggie trusted to make sure AI worked for journalists, not against them. Their conversation was tense at first. Do you even understand AI, Mom? Emily scoffed. You've been treating it like the enemy. Maggie took a deep breath. I understand what it's done to people like me. And if we don't control it, it'll keep happening. Emily folded her arms. And what do you propose? Turning back time? No, Maggie said. Building something better. 6 months later, Callahan Reports was no longer just a news site. It was a movement. With Emily's expertise, they launched the first AI-assisted newsroom built to enhance human reporting, not replace it. AI for research. AI for fact-checking. But the final words? Always human. Meanwhile, the Tribune collapsed under lawsuits and public distrust. Lucas Greer resigned. The board liquidated assets. Maggie bought the archives for $1. She stood in front of her new headquarters, the same building that once belonged to the Tribune. It wasn't about reclaiming an old legacy. It was about rewriting the future. And for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of what was coming next. Because this time, she was leading the change. Maggie's story is more than just a battle against AI. It's a battle for relevance, for integrity, for a future where experience and wisdom aren't erased by technology. Because in a world obsessed with what's new, sometimes the greatest innovation is remembering what's worth keeping. So tell me, do you believe AI will improve or destroy journalism? Comment 2 if you think human journalists will always have a place. Comment 7 if you think AI is the future, whether we like it or not. And don't forget, subscribe to EN True Tales to hear more stories of resilience, power, and second chances.